I'm seeing a couple of familiar names on here too.
Yeah, it's
So
great.
hello to those of you who we know already.
Yes, good to see you joining us.
As you're joining here, get comfortable and um, consider how feedback has worked for you in the past, in your personal life, at work. How has it gone when you've given feedback? How has it gone when you've received feedback? What has it looked like when it's gone really well? What has it looked like when it's gone poorly? How has it felt? We're going to be talking a lot more about that today.
So I think we have a pretty good crowd here. We are expecting more, but how do you feel about getting started? It's just
Let's do
afternoon.
it.
Okay,
Yeah,
great.
welcome everyone. Just a reminder to record.
Yep,
There
we're
we are.
recording.
Great.
Yep.
Great. Welcome everyone. This is Overcoming the Feedback Paradox with Crystal Clear Consulting. I'm Adam Otenko, and I'm here with Candae McDonald. And Candae, why don't you introduce yourself and say a little bit about Crystal Clear Consulting?
Yeah, so Crystal Clear Consulting is a firm that works primarily with folks in higher education. We do leadership coaching and development work, which spans, that means a lot of different types of work, from working individually with managers and leaders, coaching them on their management and leadership competencies, to working with teams on their development, doing work around organizational effectiveness in a variety of ways, and then also running management and leadership cohort programs within institutions over, say, 6 months or a year to develop a group of managers and leaders. And then we have Rising Professionals, which Adam will talk about more in a bit, that Adam and I launched last year, and we have another group starting in January. You can see me and Adam live. You could see a lovely photo of Francine, who's joining us today, and because she's on here as a host, you can see her photo, but she's actually just going to be joining in as a participant today. So I'll let you introduce yourself, Adam, and then we'll give people a little orientation to Zoom and how to engage in the webinar, right? Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I'm Adam Otenko. I'm an associate with Crystal Clear Consulting. I do a lot of leadership development and conflict resolution work. I have 10 years of experience in higher education, as a manager, doing programmatic work and advising students at both Harvard and Brandeis. And with Crystal Clear, I co-developed this Rising Professionals course that I'll talk more about towards the end, which is a leadership development course for new and rising managers. And I also do coaching for Crystal Clear as well. This is a little bit different than what we typically do for our online and blended learning experiences. Typically, it uses Zoom, but not the webinar form. It's more of the meeting form. So everybody's face and video is on. There's a lot of interaction. We use breakout groups. There's a lot of small group work within that. So it's very heavy on the interaction. Because of the numbers of folks that we're expecting on this call, we thought it would make more sense to have a little bit more of a traditional webinar format, more delivery of information, also to manage your time well. You'll see that you should see the PowerPoint on your screen, as well as Candae, myself, and the picture of Francine on the right. You can go on the right and fiddle around with how you want to view this, whether you want to make me larger on the screen, or how you want that to look. In addition, at the bottom of your screen, you should have, the bottom center, you should have 3 icons. One that is a chat function, one that is to raise your hand, and one that is for question and answer. Anytime throughout this program, if you have a question or you want to make a comment, you can go to the question and answer function and write in a question and send it, and Candae will be observing that. Also, you can click raise your hand, and Candae will be observing who's got their hand raised, and that would be a way for her to unmute you and then allow you to speak. We would be able to hear you but not see you. There's a chance we may use the chat function. I will prompt that when we get to that point. Anything else that I missed on housekeeping, Candae?
I don't think so. Just that, yeah, I'm going to be kind of in the behind the scenes a little bit, managing the chat and the raise and lower hands. And there are quite a number of people on the call. So if you've got your hand raised and I'm not seeing you, it's because it's just not, I'm having to scroll up and down. So pop in a question or a chat, try to get my attention some other way. And I'll join the presenting material occasionally with Adam, but you may want to just make it Adam that you see on the screen, because he'll be doing more of the presenting of the material today.
And Cande, I'm giving you full permission to interrupt me at any point with a
Okay.
great question that we should answer, or a comment, or anything that you want to add here.
Okay. Okay, great. And I'm just thrilled to see a nice sized group and so many familiar faces, and also new people joining us today. So thanks for being here, and go ahead, and why don't you take it away?
Yeah, thanks for being here, everyone. So what do we mean by the feedback paradox, and what does it look like to overcome it? When we talk about, a lot of the work that we're presenting here comes from a number of different sources, but that include a book, Thanks for the Feedback, The Art and Science of Receiving Feedback Well by Sheila Heen and Doug Stone, as well as Radical Candor, How to Get What You Want by Saying What You Mean by Kim Scott. And when we talk about the feedback paradox, we're talking about a couple of different things. The first is the idea that that most of us say that we want to receive feedback, yet we really dread giving it. And when managers get less than positive feedback after giving feedback that they're trying to be helpful with, it's very easy to feel like people don't actually want or like feedback. And like it or not, it's the responsibility of the manager to break this cycle. The second assumption of the feedback paradox is that the assumption is that in order to break this cycle, we need to get better at giving feedback. And I actually used to work with Doug Stone and Sheila Heen after they wrote their book, Difficult Conversations. And I remembered them talking about this book, Thanks for the Feedback. It was initially focused on how to give advice to better give feedback. And what they learned was that the assumption that we need to get better at giving feedback is false, that people are actually pretty good at giving feedback. What needs improvement is how we receive feedback. So that's a lot of what we want to talk about today. Our goals here, let's go to this next slide, our objectives and goals here. We want to help you think differently about what feedback looks like, to work towards creating a culture of giving and receiving feedback in your team and your department. We want you to think about what are the steps to do that, how do you create processes around that, how do you make norms out of that. So we want to give you some concrete steps to cultivate giving and receiving feedback, not just for you, but for your whole team. And then we want to make sure that you're aware of different types of feedback and when and how to use them, as well as to be able to take what you learn here today and start applying it as soon as possible. So we said that it focuses a lot more, that doing feedback well focuses a lot more on how we receive feedback. So the first piece of advice is to ask for it. This idea that you give what you get. If you're having trouble giving feedback or getting people to take your feedback well, take a step back and come at it from a different strategic, longer view of creating a feedback culture and a practice amongst your team. And that starts with you, modeling it, asking for it, and creating that as a norm and responding well to that. So before we jump in to dig in more to this, there's a couple of questions that we would love to hear your thoughts on. Starting with the first here, how do you know when you're doing well as a manager, or how you're doing as a manager? And so I'll ask people to go down to the bottom to the question. Actually, let's use the chat function for this. If you're more comfortable typing or writing, take a moment to write down an answer there. If you want to express it verbally, we'd love to hear from you. Press the raise hand button, and Cande can unmute you, and yeah, we can hear what you have to say. How do you know how you're doing as a manager? Any action there, Cande?
No action yet. We're waiting, folks. Jump on in. Oh, so someone says if people enjoy coming to work, so their attitude maybe that they bring to work lets you know how you're doing as a manager.
Yeah.
It's kind of reading your group.
Yeah, we'll talk more about that. That's a great way to be observing what's happening all of the time and taking non-traditional information in as feedback.
Can't get people aren't jumping in yet. Come on, crew. Can you jump in? Here we go. Good. I get feedback from my supervisor, but I don't get feedback directly from those who report to me. I tend to gauge how I'm doing based on how happy my staff seems, employee productivity, health of work environment. Great. Now we're getting some answers. Great. One-on-one time to connect and not just go through a check-off list, but to ask people what they need and how they're doing. And another comment, I believe you can measure how well you're doing as a manager if your team is positive and provides good work results. So that's interesting. So a lot of gauging how you're doing as a manager just by sort of picking up the attitude and the level of engagement of the team. Employee, yeah, I think that's what we've got. So.
Yeah, there's the traditional method where you would do an annual feedback session with your supervisor, and sometimes that's all we do. And we want to be expanding how we think about this, both in traditional and non-traditional ways.
Yeah. Yeah.
What about
a couple more comments along the same lines? Creating a safe environment so that people feel comfortable coming to their manager to talk. Okay.
And some of those responses were to the second question as well. If there's other responses on how you ask for feedback, I'd be really curious to hear about that. Do people proactively ask for feedback, either on specific instances or in general? And if so, what does that look like? And who do you ask for that feedback from?
And you can raise hands too if you want to join in by over your microphone. And we'd love to hear your voices. So it's not just Adam and I talking away here. Let's see what we've got. Anyone want to answer that question specifically about how you ask for feedback? Oh, can you please repeat the question?
The question is, how do you ask for feedback? If you even do. Do you ask for feedback? If so, how do you ask for it?
From your direct reports.
From whom? Oh, you're specifically from direct reports, yeah.
Yeah. So one-on-one time, particularly with newer employees, see if they're getting what they need and how I can be more helpful. My manager asked me in for a one-on-one, what do you wish I do more of? What do you wish I would do less of? So somebody's manager is asking them that. I ask for feedback from my employees through brainstorming at monthly meetings based on a few bullet point topics.
So there's some specificity about what you're looking for feedback on, and it sounds like it's in a group setting.
And then during the annual performance review, always asking people to tell them if there's something they can do better to support them.
As these continue to come in, I'm curious about how it typically goes in terms of that conversation. Does that go well? How do you react, either both internally and externally, to the feedback that you get? How does that look different if it's positive or critical? How do you react internally, especially when it's unexpected? It's very easy to respond to feedback when you are expecting what it looks like, but when it's out of the blue or unexpected, what happens?
We get some responses to that.
I'm assuming there's a little bit of a delay in the time it takes to type things out here. So
we try to keep it constructive, whether positive or negative. Let's see, waiting for a couple of other responses here. So it's how do you find yourself responding to feedback? Critical or positive, expected or unexpected? What happens internally for you, or what do you think people read on you? How do you think you're modeling receiving feedback to your direct reports? So maybe we want to just continue to let people think about that, and maybe they'll jump in with some more answers as we go along.
Yeah, it sounds like there's some things that are working really well in the responses that we're getting. Especially this last question about when the feedback is critical or it's unexpected. Sometimes the biggest challenge can be about how we internalize or feel about what they're saying about us. And so the first thing that we want to suggest that to focus on what we can control here. And we actually think that there's a lot of behavior that can impact the team that you can control. both in terms of the modeling, as we've mentioned, but in how you react to what's happening and how you do that consistently. Feedback is really hard when it's on the wrong topic, a topic that you're not actually interested in or ready to receive feedback on at that point. It can also be really difficult to receive when you're not ready for it. There's some internal resources that often we need to have to manage our identity and status and other things when we're receiving feedback. So how do you handle it when you disagree or when it threatens you? When it's not delivered in a way that feels comfortable? And so what we suggest is that one of the best ways to begin creating culture change in your department is to be really consistent and proactive with asking for feedback. Let people know ahead of time that what you're interested in learning about, what specifically you want to learn about. And as we said, when you want to receive it. Most people want to receive feedback on what they want to receive it on, when they're ready to receive it, at a time that they're able to receive it. And then managing your own reaction to that. So we actually have 5 different methods that we suggest to foster feedback. Just asking is the first, and these move from less to more structure as we go down here. And we're going to dig into each of these in more detail. So the first is just ask. The second is to pay attention to what's going on around you. Some of you, it sounds like, are already doing that. You're sort of feeling the vibe of and the energy in the room about where people are. And so when there's high engagement, that's a positive sign, positive feedback for you. But we'll get into more about where to look and what to pull from. Number 3 is to set up one-on-one 10-minute conversations that are going to be not so much task-focused or progress report-focused, but check-ins on how things are going around general management. Number 4, focusing on pluses and deltas, what things are going really well, what you might want to do differently, and that can be really effective for teams or groups. And then the 5th is the most formal, a 360 review, engaging your supervisor. So let's go through each of these in more detail. And when making these requests, consider why. What's the intent? What are you looking to do here? So for asking for feedback, be specific. I'm trying to get better at X because I want to Y. Let them know what you're trying to do. So it's something that is within a certain boundary. And include what your assessment is. I'm trying to work on this. I think I'm doing well in this area, but I'm trying to improve. Get their feedback on that competency. And also include what you're already doing to work on it and what obstacles exist there in order to achieve that. And potentially what type of feedback you want, not just on what topic, but in what way. Providing these guidelines or boundaries of what you want to receive feedback on, how and why, can help the person who's giving you feedback feel a lot safer. And to the extent that you can ask for specific data, what you said, how you said it, where it was, when it happened, and what the impact was, that's going to be really helpful in understanding more about what you're specifically doing in terms of behavior to be able to change that moving forward. I'm seeing a number of comments here, Kande. Is it worth going back to some of these answers to questions, or?
I was sort of, some of the questions started trickling in about, or answers started trickling into that question about how we respond. And so people were saying, some people saying the critical feedback is more difficult to get on the table. They appreciate it, but try not to internalize it, or maybe recognize that they do a little cringing internally while trying to, present an open response, or just haven't received negative feedback. So some people may be anticipating from newer employees that they might get some different feedback than they're used to. So I think all of this, that what Adam was just saying is all about sort of starting from asking in order to send the message that you're open to receiving it, and also modeling for your staff how they might also be asking for feedback in really specific ways.
Yeah, and it's not uncommon to not even when you ask for feedback to not receive a negative feedback as a supervisor, because the power dynamic there is a barrier that has to be overcome by creating a space that reinforces that it's okay to share something that might be perceived as negative or that might challenge the power dynamics there. So yeah, we'll dig in deeper into some of these pieces to create that culture and to make increase the comfort level for your staff to be able to share that.
Yeah,
And
I think.
go ahead.
I was just going to say, I think as Adam and I were talking about earlier, that if you advance the slide to that set of questions, Adam, that you had, that what you're doing here is providing really clear guideposts for your staff to help them feel really safe. Like it's really, really clear for them exactly what you're asking for. Basically just sort of lowering the threat as much as you possibly can for them to feel comfortable that you really mean it. You're actually really want to hear from them how you're doing.
You mentioned threat, and it makes me think of David Rock's neuro leadership work, which if we have time and there are questions about how to react to critical feedback when there's a cringe and it hits you in a place that hurts, how to respond to that. We get into that much more in the Rising Professionals program, but if we have a little bit of time today, we have a couple of exercises that we might be able to share on that. If there's questions as we move along here, please feel free to ask. The second part on the just ask here is, so this is a model for feedback that is very typical, the situation, behavior, feeling, or impact. It's very typical of giving feedback. And so giving feedback in this way might look like you come to the conversation with an assumption and an intention that the person you're delivering this feedback to is trying to do the best they possibly can to achieve their goals. And your job in giving them feedback is really in service of them and supportive to them to try and help them better achieve those goals, because whatever happened didn't work out so well. And there may be a process move where you say something like, I'd like to talk about what happened. I'd love to share my perspective, hear your perspective. And then we get into a discussion followed by a dialogue or conversation about what that might look like. And you present the situation, you describe your observations of their behavior. And if it was an impact on you, you can say that made me feel this way. Or you can say, I observed the impact on these other people, or I'm concerned that it may have had an impact in this negative way that is obviously not aligned with the goals you're trying to achieve. So let's talk about what behavior might be better aligned with that. If you take that approach for giving feedback and you flip it on its head and you present it as an approach to asking for feedback, it would actually look very similar, and it would help to decrease the threat levels, as Candace mentioned, and create more of a culture of giving and receiving. So you would come with the same intentions, but it would be about you. I did this behavior, but my intention was to positively impact my goals, to try and work better towards those. Not sure if I hit them or not, but that was my intention. And so I'm just trying to do the best that I can. You can make a similar process move. I'd love to hear from you about your thoughts on how I did. I'd love to share my thoughts on it. We can have that discussion. And then you get into, here's the situation, here was my behavior, here's the impact that I may have seen, or how it may have helped made people feel. And by introducing this model to your staff, you're teaching them you're modeling for them how to ask, but you're also teaching them how to give feedback back to you, which can also help them in the way that they ask for feedback. And if your staff is coming to you when they perceive something may not have gone as well as they would have liked, or they didn't achieve what they wanted to, that's a good outcome. And that's especially true, and this is especially helpful when you're giving positive feedback. Kende, anything that you would add to this ask for feedback section?
No, I don't think so.
You like to say that this is more of a curry or a stew than a meringue or a souffle, where I wasn't prompting you for that, but I know that you've mentioned that in the past, so that this isn't the type of situation where there's exact measurements and an exact process or order of when and timing of when things have to happen. But as long as you're using the situation, behavior, and feeling or impact, that should be really effective.
Yeah, I guess the reason why I sometimes make that sort of analogy to being more of a curry or a stew than a meringue or a souffle is sometimes when you're practicing it, it's new. People can feel a little stilted with, okay, I've got to remember a situation and then behavior and then how I felt about it and then impact, and it feels a bit formulaic. And so just to encourage you that it's not going to collapse like a souffle if you get a little out of sequence.
Yes.
And it's okay. And that the more you practice it, you might come with, or just practice it and get used to it and decide in this context or this situation, I'm going to kind of deliver it in this particular way because it just intuitively makes sense. Or you get used to your way of doing it, and that's fine. It's just some of the situation and the behavior and the impact are key ingredients in whatever order they come in.
Yeah. As we all know, it's not just about what you are saying, but how you are saying it. And so that brings us to the second piece for creating this kind of culture, and that is to be paying attention, getting feedback from all different areas. And we're taking some data here. The research shows that in interpersonal communication, especially times when the words and tone or body language, the way that things are said and the body language that it's delivered with are not matching up, that we actually pay attention very little, only 7%, to what people are saying, the words that they're saying, far more to tone and even more to body language. So what we've learned is that when what somebody is saying and the way that they're saying it or how they're delivering it don't align, we draw a conclusion that is not actually based on the words that they said. Our conclusion about what they're actually delivering is whatever that tone of voice was. If they were angry, if they were yelling, if they were excited, if their body language felt aggressive, that's what we're focusing on, even if they were sharing something that they think is innocuous. So this both means that it's important to pay attention as when you're delivering feedback in what that looks like, but also in how you're receiving it, and not just when somebody's in front of you one-on-one giving feedback, but as some of the participants mentioned, based on how the group feels, based on things that are happening in meetings after you shared something. There are a lot of different areas where if you're looking out for tone, looking out for body language, you can gather information that can be helpful about how you're doing that may not be in a traditional or structured way.
And I think the key thing about that is if you're picking up on something about tone and body language that seems incongruent, to notice if you're drawing conclusions and making assumptions about that, and to not rely on that, right? Mm-hmm. The piece about getting the feedback then is to pay attention and ask, to inquire. Okay, I notice nobody's talking around the table right now. Can you help me understand what's going on? Or if your staff normally seems happy and engaged, and suddenly they're not, or you're seeing whispered conversations and grumbling, it's inquiring, right? So you read it, but don't assume you know what it means. But it's a source of feedback. There's some data there for you to inquire about. Someone asked for the data source on this, and I'll have to look it up. This is some research that's been replicated many, many times, and I will have to look up where that comes from. I don't have it off the top of my head, but I can get a hold of that.
Number 3 is the one-on-one conversation, a 10-minute conversation. And as I mentioned before, this is not about tasks. So as a direct report, this might be something that you prompt them in advance to bring one thing that's going well and a developmental goal for them about you, one thing that you're doing well, what's next for you, a developmental goal, and one thing that you are doing well. This is from the direct report as a manager. What's one thing that you're doing well and one thing that they feel like needs attention in how you manage. These can be really brief. And one of the things that can come out of this is it might uncover things or takeaways that might require more time to discuss further. Anything that you'd add on this, Kendra?
Well, just that, the idea that we were suggesting first just try to have a conversation and ask for the feedback, and then paying attention to maybe some feedback that's there that you have in mind, that nonverbal data. And if that's not getting you what you need in terms of knowing how people are feeling about how your management, or even those examples of you asking for feedback and seeking feedback based on some nonverbal data aren't starting to generate a more open and receptive climate for feedback, that you can go to something more structured. And so this 10-minute conversation tool is a little bit more formal. You would provide this outline to your staff member beforehand so that they're prepared. You would say, we're going to spend 10 minutes at the beginning or end of our one-on-one on this. And it's just another way of providing a little bit more scaffolding around the conversation to start generating more feedback. Oh, great. Thank you, Francine. She has sent out to everybody the reference for that body language tone pie chart that we had. So thank you. It's there in the chat. So yeah, so just thinking of, going to sort of different structures that you can use. One doesn't work, try something else.
Again, we're getting progressively more structured as we move along here. The fourth part, which works really well for teams and groups, is this plus delta. What worked really well? What might we want to change going forward? So this, if you've delivered an event, if there's been a large piece of work that the whole team was a part of, doing this group can work really well. It can be really effective at staff meetings when you're within a larger group. And one of the things that we suggest around this is that some people's pluses can be other people's deltas. So encouraging differences of opinions and getting as much information as you can and the nuances of that information can be really helpful. Of course, if you are doing it, you have to continue to do the pluses. And if you're asking for what you should do differently, you have to be able to apply that feedback and actually change what you're doing, or else the next time you ask about what you need to be doing differently, it might get a response with a little skepticism.
Or at least be able to respond to it, right? I mean, you can't necessarily, actually, a question that came in was, what do you do about people complaining about benefits and time off and things that are out of your control? And they feel unappreciated by the organization, but you as a manager don't necessarily have any control over it. So, if somebody put down as a delta about some event or meeting or something, and it's really out of your control, or you just don't think it's appropriate, it's not that you have to, by having asked, you have to deliver. It means at least that want or that desire is there, right? So it's been stated, it's been put on the table, and then you can address it directly with either being able to do something about it or not, or maybe you can do something slightly different, or you can have a conversation about it. So that being that, you just need to be prepared to respond to what comes up in some way.
Yeah, that specific incident is interesting because there may be a lack of information that person is feeling like they may be treated differently than other people, when in fact it's that way for others, and they're not the only one that may feel that way about time off and things like that. And just listening and validation and showing that you understand that is their experience, that can often go a long way. And letting them know, if I could do something to fix this, I would love to look into it, but I can't. That's just the way that it is, and unfortunately, I don't have much control over that. But I empathize. The last piece here is a formal 360. So this would involve your supervisor. And it would be, again, specific on what you want to receive feedback on. So you might give 2 to 3 questions that they would send to your direct reports. You would also, and they would gather the data there, and it can be really helpful, especially if you have a lot of direct reports, for your supervisor to analyze the data in a qualitative way, where they would group the responses into themes, so that you're not just getting all of the information and then trying to pick through what is an outlier, what isn't. But if there's patterns throughout, that you're getting that information. And then you would also be getting information from your supervisor. And again, being really specific on what you're looking for is important here.
And then I think it's similar to the plus delta, then it's how do you let your staff know, this is what I heard, and this is how I want to respond to what I heard. So all of this is, it's great to ask for the feedback, and you have to be ready to respond in some way. You don't have to say, I can make that change or do it just because it's been stated, but you need to show them that you heard it and how will you respond? And again, all of this being about ways that you can show your openness to feedback to help build some capacity and openness to your staff receiving feedback. So you're modeling it, right? So if you want your staff to be able to take feedback, recognize it, say what they've heard, and show how they're working on it, then you're modeling first how you can do that.
What questions or comments do people have about these 5 simple ways to foster feedback?
And again, we'd love for people to raise their hand and jump in verbally if you want to get on your microphone and ask a question. But we're also happy to take questions through the Q&A, which I think maybe will just come to me, or through chat. And when you chat, you can select to send it to panelists and attendees, and everyone can see the question, or just a panelist and I'll see the question. So we've got some time here to respond to some questions. How often do you recommend the one-on-one 10-minute conversations to happen? Do you want me to answer that, Adam, or do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I mean, I've done them weekly, and I have found that really helpful, but I don't think it has to be that often. I'm curious about your thoughts.
Yeah, and I would say I'd be interested to hear maybe some participants on the webinar use it, and they might have some experience with it. But I would say, so someone else says they do it weekly. I think you could try it, start weekly to build relationship, and then see what feels needed and appropriate, right? And it is meant to just be really quick, and to identify if there are any things that you need to, issues you need to create some more time somewhere else on your calendar to get into a deeper conversation with somebody about it. But for building relationship and starting to get that two-way communication going, weekly sounds great, or bi-weekly, and then you can discuss together collaboratively what feels like the right amount of time to attend to this. So someone else is saying they start off weekly with new staff and then they move to bi-weekly as they build relationship. Great. Let's see. I currently have a one-on-one every week with my supervisor. Most of my staff has been in my institution for many years. It seems strange and awkward to institute something like this for older employees, but then unfair to ask new employees to do it, but not for the most established folk. You know, that's an interesting point. Could I respond to that, Adam?
Of course.
I recently introduced this in a management leadership development program with people who had, you know, the managers in the program had been, some of them there for many, many years with the same manager for many years, and some were brand new. And they all came in, the managers and the participants came in and did it together. And the comments that I got from the people who had been in that relationship for a long time were, it was really eye-opening to them how much information they got out of that 10 minutes that they didn't have, that there were a lot of assumptions, and that even in a well-established relationship, it creates a different kind of conversation. And it did open up some channels for them, and it reminded them of the value of taking time to just talk about how it's going and how the relationship's going, and is everybody getting what they need, as opposed to being focused on task. I would say you could think of the 10-minute conversation as a curry or a soup too, then maybe with a more established relationship where, you know, maybe you don't follow exactly that procedure, but you explicitly say, let's make some time for a different type of check-in than we've been giving ourselves, and just see what comes out of that. People may really appreciate that. Again, it's not something you're doing to them. It's a conversation you're trying to generate with them so that you can co-create what type of conversation would work well for you with somebody you have a more established relationship with. Okay, and then someone's saying, perhaps I haven't been specific enough, but I have asked for feedback and my direct report doesn't give it to me. And then I end up guessing what I need that I'm not giving her. Do you have any suggestions? So, Adam, I just responded to the last one. Do you want to jump in?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, I can imagine it's really frustrating, especially when you're asking for it. The first thing that comes to mind is to be specific, and especially if it's just after something that happened, where the data is easy to pull from. But again, I think I think of this as a culture shift, that it is hard as a direct report to give honest feedback to our supervisor, especially when it's not positive, and oftentimes it just feels easier to not say anything and just kind of continue with the status quo. Um, and so understanding that one, it's a safe place, and creating that safe place for them to share, and reinforcing after they've shared that there isn't going to be negative impact on them, and that you're going to receive it really well is critically important. Um, and creating the kind of environment where feedback is shared often and in helpful ways and received really well by everybody takes time. So I think it's applying a number of these different tools and just kind of building it into habits on a week to week or month to month basis, depending on which of these that you're using.
Yeah, I do. I agree. Ditto on all of that, of course. And to build on that, just the question is, perhaps I haven't been specific enough. So I know it's not, maybe we'd have to have more detail from your situation. I do wonder if it's helpful if you're guessing what that direct report might need, maybe tell them. So, you haven't had a lot of feedback from me. So I'm reading that I think more of this or something a little different might be more helpful. So I'd like to try that, and you give me some feedback on how that goes. So going all the way back to that first suggestion of just asking, but saying really specifically what it is that you're going to try to do and how you'd like some feedback on it. To really, I don't know, I think of it as scaffolding, to really build a lot of structure around the conversation that you're asking for, to help the person feel safer giving you feedback.
And I'm thinking that could be applied to what you're doing as you're doing it. I'm doing this because I'm perceiving that you may get this benefit out of it, and to have that conversation about whether it's landing well or not.
Yeah. It's also leading me to our next slide that you started to show. So I'm wondering if
Let's
maybe that would be helpful too.
You had a thought on this?
Oh no, I was just thinking that
okay.
this comment about like how to get people to give more feedback, and then it made me think of like, well, there are different types of feedback, so maybe that would be helpful to talk about also.
Yeah, so there's different types of feedback, and some of them focus more on the past, some of them focus more on the future. But we wanted to start making you aware of what these may look like, and you may be doing a number of these already. About the types of feedback you give, how often you give it, and making sure that it fits with what your direct reports want. I was in a coaching session the other day with someone who's new to managing, and one of the things that we discussed was going into this new role in the first meeting with his direct reports, asking them what ways that they like to be managed. The person that I was coaching has been thinking about, well, what are the ways that I like to be managed? And that can be really helpful, but having that direct communication and understanding where the differences may lie can be really helpful. So based on that, there are these different types. The first one on the left, thanks and praise. This is the idea that it's all past focused and it's all positive. It's a lot of, hey, that was great. Thanks a lot for that. And the note here is that it really needs to be specific. And applying the situation behavior impact model can be really helpful. Even if it's just positive and past focused, at least they know what you did in this situation, this specific behavior had this impact, and for those reasons, that was great. So now they know what behavior to repeat if they want to have a similar impact or get similar praise from you. The second piece, constructive or critical. So this is situation behavior impact, but always focused on how to improve something that didn't go as well as we would have hoped. Here, it's really important to pay attention to your tone and body language when you're delivering it, and to make sure that you're mixing it up with some others. The one in the middle, status check. So this is a progress towards a goal status check. If your direct report has said that they want to be a team lead by X date, this is a check-in on where they are in that progress towards that goal based on that timeline. This is something that in the work that we do, we find is not used very often. Not many people do the status check, but it's really highly valued. Often people really want to know where they stand, generally in terms of expectations, to be able to manage them effectively, but especially towards goals that have been jointly outlined. The coaching piece here starts to look forward focused, and it's not giving information that you think about how they're doing. It's really asking questions to help them uncover for themselves their own self-evaluation, their own judgment, their own reality testing of assumptions that they have or beliefs that may be limiting to them and their progress, and really helping them progress through their own self-development, mostly through questions. We do a lot of peer coaching and a little bit of coaching through the Rising Professional program. And then the last one, ideas here, this is just future focus. This is when there is a stated and understood goal. And this is just sharing ideas without any evaluation. There's no positive or negative. It's just, well, I wonder if you tried this, what the outcome might be. Or how about if you went about it in this way, trying these things. Obviously, a combination of these makes a lot of sense. And when you should apply different ones of these matters a lot. Candale, I invite you to add and share.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think, so on the notion of there being these different types of feedback and each of them having a different impact on the receiver of the feedback, right? So they have sort of a different purpose. And so one thing is, I think that you may find that you lean on one or two of these more than the others. And so it can be helpful to be aware of all of these and be thinking very intentionally about how to build your skill and familiarity with all 5 of these, because they all do something different. And the more versatile you can get with the types of feedback, the more almost sort of strategic you can be in when you apply one as opposed to another. I think that the feed forward in particular, coaching and feed forward really stimulate a different part of the brain and tap into people and their motivations and inspiration in a very different way than the backward looking, constructive, and thanks and praise. Not that those aren't good and valuable and really important also, but if somebody says, I really want to become a better public speaker, and you start saying, yeah, and I noticed in your public speaking the other day that here's some, things that didn't go so well, and here's some constructive feedback. I mean, that's one possibility. And so those are some things you might work on. But if somebody says, I really want to be a better public speaker, and you say, oh, cool. So what are your ideas about how you might get there? And here are some ideas for how you might accomplish that goal. Toastmasters, and how about you practice speaking, stand up and give your presentation at the next staff meeting. But it's all forward looking, and just a positive, constructive feed forward generates a really different, more inspirational and aspirational sort of feeling in the recipient. And you might get different results. If you've been giving constructive feedback, but you haven't tried feed forward, you might try it and see if it just gets different results for someone.
You mentioned, I love that example, and it raised a coaching question for me. What would it look like for you to be an excellent public speaker? How would you know when you've achieved that?
Right.
And the motivation piece that it taps into, the intrinsic motivation, when they're uncovering it for themselves, it can be unbelievably powerful, and help your direct report achieve their goals that ideally are mutual goals much faster and with much less hand-holding and supervision. So I think both of those forward-focusing ones can, like you said, tap into a different source of productivity and motivation.
Yeah, definitely. And the final thought, sorry, you're going to go.
No, go ahead.
The final thing I was going to say about this is some of you have mentioned that you have some newer staff and some long-term staff. So the other thing to think about in this, things on the feedback end and things on the feed forward end is when people are ready for different types of feedback at different stages in their development on the job, You're smiling, Adam. Were you thinking the same thing?
Exactly the same thing.
Same thing. So do you want to pick up from there?
No, keep going.
Okay. So when someone is brand new to the job and they're still learning the job, it's really the things on the left-hand side, the thanks and praise and constructive feedback, and even the status check that are more appropriate, because they're just learning how to sort of take in the information and then replicate what they're learning at this point. They're not at the point of being able to evaluate their own performance or evaluate the value of why we even do this work, or maybe even be ready for future looking goals, because they're just future looking developmental goals, because they're just trying to learn the current job. So to try to do a coaching approach or some feed forward for someone when it's too soon in their development is not, you may not get a good response from them. You may get a puzzled look or even frustration because they feel like they should be able to answer your question and they can't. And so there's also sort of a timing thing that's important. And it's very individual for the person. And even within one person, it's specific to what task or responsibility you're talking about, to think about what's appropriate to apply. Adam, anything else to add to that?
Yeah, well, so you spoke about the left side applied to newer staff. When a staff member is in a development phase where they're ready to take things on by themselves and really take a leadership approach, often the things on the left side don't land in the same way. They're really looking for more of the coaching and the idea focus feedback. And that's when I think you can really multiply the productivity of your office, because you're dramatically reducing the amount of oversight time and explanation time, the hand-holding that I was mentioning earlier that typically is included on the left side, checking in more periodically and with the status checks and a lot more almost to the point of micromanagement, but that kind of guidance at that higher developmental phase. When you're doing the coaching or the idea piece, it can be just a short 10-minute conversation about a topic where you really change the way that they think about something that allows them to just continue running at a much faster pace.
So I was thinking about tying this all back into you as the manager, starting by asking for feedback. So obviously it's a little odd to say, I'd really like some thanks and praise. So you're maybe not going to ask for that. Hopefully you're getting it. But even you could share this 5-point, model with your staff and point to, how about some, what I'd really like is some constructive critical feedback or a status check on how I'm doing at improving these things that I'm working on. And by sharing this with them, you're bringing them into this idea that there are different types of feedback, and that if there's a type of feedback they're not getting from you that would be helpful to them, that might be a little different than what they're used to, but they would appreciate it, it might help them to see this and be able to articulate the ask, for them, getting back to that 10-minute conversation. They might be able to say, okay, now I see I'm not getting this specific type of feedback from you, and I'd like more of that. And you could talk about what that would look like. By the way, somebody asked for the slides on this. And so we can send you the PowerPoint of these slides to everyone on the call after this.
Are there any questions about anything that we've discussed throughout here, or comments on how you have used any of these in ways that have worked really well?
People might be typing, Adam, and I'm conscious of the time. So I'm wondering if you want to move forward, and then as people start to answer that, you could talk about rising professionals, and then as people start to answer, I'll share their answers. Yeah,
so our next cohort for our Rising Professionals Blended Learning Program starts January 8th. That's our kickoff, and this is this involves the alignment of higher education mission, vision, and values with personal passions that can connect around mission-driven work. It involves management development. It involves foundational personal development. So it's things like work-life balance, self-awareness and communication, delegation, supervising to development places like what we were just talking about, the application of those different feedback forms to conflict resolution, such as negotiation and difficult conversations, and approaches to change management. And we do it through, after the kickoff, 6 2-hour monthly virtual sessions We have formal peer coaching sessions. This is so this is coaching with other participants. These tend to be participants from across different universities. So there's some best practices that you learn from people in different areas. And then it also includes one coaching session with me. So I'm going to be delivering this round of this program. And if you're interested in registering, you can go to clearconsulting.com/rising professionals.
And there's a lot more description of the program at that website. And I just want to reiterate again that the 2-hour virtual sessions are in the meeting format. So you'd see all your peers on the screen and you'd be in conversation with them the whole time. So it's not as presentational as this webinar was today.
Yeah, even more engaging than I've been today.
Yeah,
these webinars
if you can imagine Adam being even more engaging than he was today.
And far more fun for everybody involved because we'll get to interact a lot more.
Yeah. So I'm not seeing any responses coming in. Anyone have any final questions or comments, ways that you've used any of this, or anything that you're struggling with in terms of thinking about how to apply some of the content that we've shared with you today? And we know some people probably need to jump off and get going, but if there's anyone who wants to stay on with more questions, we're happy to be on for a little bit longer.
Yeah, we'll stick around, but thank you if you need to jump off. Thank you so much for participating. We hope you got a lot out of it. Please go start using some of these things and let us know how it goes and whether we can be of service.
And we will post this recording up on our website or on our YouTube channel. So if you know of anybody who was planning to attend today who couldn't make it, they'll be able to find the recording online sometime soon. So I don't see any additional questions coming in. I think people are wrapping up and getting back to work.
Thanks, everyone.
So thank you. Some people are just sending in thank yous. So thank you for being here. It was great to see you. Well, or chat with you. Okay, I think people are pretty much just signing off. I'm not seeing any responses coming in. So I'm going to stop the recording and it's a wrap.
Thanks, everyone.